All right, shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Shalom. The weather's getting better. Or
Yeah, oh yeah, it's bright and sunny. It's heating up again.
okay, what what about the flood? I mean, did it? I mean, did it get? I mean, it's did they fix it?
Well, it's okay, so now it's up to like I think 80, 82 deaths, and it still got like I don't know. I think I'm not sure. It should be about 20 more people that's still not accounted for. I'm sorry, 11 from one of the camps, that main camp, Camp Mystic. So I hadn't seen the news this morning, but that's what it was last night. And so
Oh, it's crazy.
yeah, so it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough.
Uh, yeah, it's interesting too when you think about like I always think about this when I hear about like deaths and tragedy or things. You just think about like how everything was just like decided on Rosh Hashanah. Like who's gonna live, who's not gonna live. What type of prosperity you have. Everything's decided on
Yeah,
that
and that
day.
yeah,
Uh,
and I think that's why we are to have the mindset and have the posture daily, to live right daily, to take every moment to do mitzvah, to to acknowledge acknowledge Hashem in all creation. I think that's very important. We've had that concept all for a long time now, but now we have the vocabulary and the definitions to actually put behind it. But the idea is that you only have today to actually live for Hashem. And that's what we're responsible for right at this moment. And so it's
yeah.
kind of like, man, God forbid, someone is doing something or involved in some activity, when that time comes, and so it's just like, in an activity that's not pleasing to Hashem, in other words. But
Mm,
but rather, man, what a blessing it is to be actually doing His will, on a day-to-day basis.
mm. Amen, 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 amen. So the thing is this something, we've been talking about a lot today, um, and really critiquing it. And a lot of it is inspired by the Ramchal and how he like systematizes, different categories and systems of thought, right? And from that perspective, we were really, critiquing the idea of the African American. Like, what is the African American, right? Because on one hand, we have a social definition of the African American, which has evolved over time. There was black, there was Negro, colored, a lot of these types of sentiments. You know what I'm saying? And so, anyway, so that's that definition. Now, that definition is was really much connected to this idea of property and or product, right? Type of a thing, right? Where the people came off of the slave ships, you know, were identified as, these various terms as a way to identify, their role in society, which was in essence the product, not to be, considered, a human being, but a product, right? So that's the dynamic. Now, America created other rules along with that, and I'm not a sociologist, right? I'm just picking specific points to build to a bigger idea. And so America had other ideas, which is like, if a white man has a child with a black woman, like his slave, that child is considered black. Why? Because there's this idea of a one drop rule, right? So if you have any aspect connected to at this time, I mean, even that concept obviously has evolved a lot, right? But I'm talking about the inception of the idea of the African American. There was this idea that says, like, if you have any of this, say, African or whatever type of DNA, and I think it was also including Hispanics and American Indians, that you're considered like the other, right? And the other, as it related for African Americans and Indians, other people, a lot of it had to do with product, right? Because they were building this capitalistic society that was built around industry and you know these types of things, right? And so um, you had this dynamic, right? Now, the point that I'm getting to with this is to say that that was the identity as it relates to America. Like, we were products, right? My ancestors were products, right? And they were here to fulfill a role in this economic agent, right? Whether it was through slavery or whatever. And so obviously, things over time evolved, to a degree. And the role of the African American went from, say, product to slowly human, right? And so this process of going from product to slowly human is still identified by the same language, right? Which is black, which is colored, which is Negro, which is African American, right? These all stem from the same line of thought. So my challenge is to say, well, when I think about it, and I think about the African American, right, who came through chattel slavery, in 2025, they are a mixture of white people from Europe, of American Indians that were native to this land, to Hispanics or Spanish people who lived in this land, and various groups traveling through the islands in Canada, right? And so this idea of being, this idea of being black, this idea of being black is not necessarily expressive of these things. Now, there's this idea I was talking about earlier with Otino, that there's a concept around this idea of like the lineage of David, right? And the lineage of David, coming through this idea of Ruth, right? And Ruth coming from this nation called Moab, right? And so some of the sages teach that the evolution of the Jewish people was needed to take on certain strengths and certain qualities that other nations had, right? For the good. Now, obviously, someone also took them for the bad, but for the good. And he said from Moab, the strength of kingship comes from that, right? This idea of, a strength to rule, right? Which is not necessarily the trait of Jacob, right? The trait of Jacob was, to be in the tent, to be humble, to be learning, to be underneath God, to be in community, right? So this idea of kingship is not necessarily such an idea. The people had to go to Shmuel and ask him to give them a king, right? And so this idea of Moab, like obviously Shaul was, Benjamite, but after that, it was the descendants of Yehuda, right? And so that concept of kingship and that power largely, they say, has a lot to do with what Ruth brought into that gene pool, through her marriage, right? And so anyway, so the idea behind this, right? The idea behind it is to say that when we look at the so-called, the African American, I don't want to use so-called because I know everyone, they used that line before me, right? But this idea of the African American is not, we have to look at all of these other connections that we have inside of us, because these are also different strengths, right? From the aspect that even though a lot of our connection to Europe came through rape, right? But nevertheless, it's still a part of who we are, right? And even that process, of that intermixing with slave master in that dynamic, or even say our later connection, so you have the European component, right? And then you have this dynamic of, the American Indians, right? Some people think the American Indians may even be descendants of, tribes, right? You have that component, right? And then you have our connection to what we would call Spanish people, Latin Americans, or whatever they want to call it, Mexicans, whatever. But these people were native. I mean, they're blended in now. We may not think of it that way, but we're all connected. And then you take that connection of all those connections, and then you go all the way back to Africa. And we have the connection of Africa inside of us, right? And the blending of those cultures. And then many of us are descendants from the Israelite tribes that were in the west of Africa, right? So we even have that connection going all the way back to the base of Migdash. But all of these different strengths we have inside of us, right? All of these different expressions of self, we have inside of us. And I would state that the challenge with that perspective of defining ourselves, say as African Americans or blacks, or even saying descendants of the 12 tribes, I don't feel like that's doing us justice, because we're so big. We're such an accumulation of different strengths and powers, and and we're unique to the whole world in that way, right? Like, we're completely unique to the whole world in that way. I don't know if there's another group of people that are that can say that they have not only that, and then there's another component too, which is this aspect of trauma, right? And a lot of the greatest gifts that people have been able to create has been because they've been in traumatic environments, right? Like, for example, what could be a good example? Like, sometimes people grow up in environments where they had really parents that were very emotionally unstable, right? And so because of that, the kids developed a high sensitivity to be able to read energies and read, patterns, and read, body language. And then from there, they're able to contour themselves, right? And they developed this extra sensitivity. And now some people use that to be what they call like empaths, and all these different other, very like high sciences that have to do with, relatability and empathy and these types of things, right? Or you even can see it in art. A lot of people develop tremendous artistic skills because of like Justin Bieber, for example. I gave the example earlier. Like Justin Bieber, his mom tells a story that when his parents got divorced when they were young, and the mom suffered from depression. So Justin Bieber used to, perform for his mom in the house to make her happy. And through that, he developed this ability, these skills, right, to connect with people and whatnot. So the point is just saying that trauma creates a dynamic. And so when I look at the Black experience in America, we've never had a chance to really rest, right? We've always been economically disadvantaged, right? Meaning that, we're getting less, right? And we're not given the means to create more, right? By systematic design. And so we've always had economic stress. They've had drugs and all types of things put into our communities, right? We didn't go and cut the deals with the Colombians. We didn't do a lobby to have senators and Congress people that were weak on border laws. We didn't have any relationship to El Chapo and the El Capo or whatever, these types. But we didn't have that. We were the underlings in the drug business. We weren't the guys bringing the weight over. We were the guys on the streets buying gold chains. So, and then they have media, that's just reminding us of the worst qualities of who we are and the worst of our community, right? And celebrates it. So these are all things that we're dealing with, right? And that creates a certain experience, where we have to, it creates a certain experience where we have to think about what type of sensitivities and what type of intelligence comes out of that, right? Where we always had to do better, right, than other people, right? Other groups, right? We couldn't make the same mistakes, right? So that creates a certain level of of intellect, right? And perhaps that intellect that we're talking about has been the basis of all these innovations that we see from these unique group of people that we don't see from any other group of Americans, right? With the same opportunities, even more opportunities, right? Even more, abilities to express themselves and even more resources. But for some reason, we are the ones that have reshaped democracy. We're the ones who reshaped economics, consumer products, even though we didn't benefit. All of our inventions are the things that make America work. Those inventions came out of the Black intellect, right? Most of the appliances, right? Even video games, the whole thing, right, comes out of the African American intellect. Where does this intellect come from? Is it African American exclusively, or is it a combination of different strengths from different nations making up a collective group of people? Right? Right? And so, God, bro, why are people calling me right now? It's like so I'm all day, right? And as soon as I start giving a class, everyone's like, anyways, but Kitra, the point is just saying that I'm just systematically analyzing what the situation is. This is not a political point. You know what I'm saying? This is not a political point. Hold on, let me tell this guy I'm doing a class. Anyways, so you can hear me okay?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, cool. So, anyways, so this isn't a political point. It's not a political position, and the position is saying that I'm just systematically looking at the details of who these people are, me being one of them, right? And looking at that, I know I have American Indians in my family. I know that I have Spanish people in my family. I know that I have Europeans blood. I know all these different things that are part of who I am. And so when I define myself as a person, am I a new creation that's maybe reflective of how a future world is going to look? Right? Like I'm looking at myself like I'm at the bottom because I'm a combination of all these things to the point that I can't even tell you what heritage do I choose? Do I choose the heritage of the African who came over here? Or do I take the heritage of the European who had intimacy with that African woman and had children? Which one am I? You see what I'm saying? And so, and that goes on and on and on. And so which one do I choose? And if I'm being told to choose a particular path, why is that? Right? And being able to say, like, okay, well, that's interesting because I can't really, I mean, I'm in Israel. I don't even see Israelis that have this type of genetic buildup, right? And you look at all the social conditions. So I'm looking at the world as it's emerging, a new world that's built around not having labor as the basis of our survival, right? A world where uniqueness and these elements are going to drive us to be even more connected as human beings. And the social constructs that divided us in the past aren't going to exist because the power base is going to shift by definition of money distribution, what wealth is, how things are acquired, what labor is, all these things change. The skill sets that were needed over there are not necessarily skill sets that will be needed over here, right? And so when we talk about that, then we say like, well, we're talking about people and civilization is going to change, right? And people, and a lot of the social structures that separate people are being broken, right? And people connecting to each other, and we already see that in America. But the African American is unique because of its autonomy and because of its lack of definitions, it created its own space, right? Where all these other people who went under the umbrella of white came into America, it ultimately got swallowed into that collective, right? As where we were always forced to be autonomous, right? And so this autonomy created culture, it created perspective, it created vision, it created prophecy. It created all these different components that these people have expressed it, and literally the entire world is subservient to it. They don't even want to listen to their art. They want to listen to what we have to say. They don't care because we said America is more just. Because they see our lives improving, therefore they trust the American dream. When we touch anything that represents identity, everybody wants a piece of it. And I'm just looking at it from the perspective of these new people that are a combination of all these different experiences that melted together in North America. Without having any cultural identity from the past. So it wasn't like all these energies that I received and I learned about my European history as me, or I learned about my African history as me, or I learned about my American Indian history as me, right? I didn't have privy to those other things. So all of what I am is without knowledge. And through this without knowledge, because the knowledge that the other people have is still someone else's narrative. The knowledge that the person in Venezuela has about what Venezuela is, that's some other professor who wrote it in a book. He's a man just like me. And he wrote a book and they published it. And they told everybody to learn this. And the people who learned this, they paid them more than the people who didn't learn it. And therefore you created an intellectual class. And these are the educated people that you tell the people who are the working class. And you say, hey, these are the people you should trust. They are the smart ones. They are the intellects. They're the ones you should listen to. And then from there, consent is created. Fine, they created their school, they created their university, they created their intellects, they created the whole show, the whole production. And you just sat in the crowd, I sat in the crowd, and everyone else sat in the crowd, and we believed it. It's like a guy goes into a cave and says he talked to God. And he comes out and he convinces everybody of it. Or he convinces a small group of people of it. And then those small group of people who are convinced of it put together a book after he dies, and then they go out and they spread it around the world. You weren't there when he spoke to God. Why do you believe it? Why do you believe it? You weren't there. You didn't see it. But you believe it. Why? Because everyone else does. So you create consent, right? You create consent. So that's that narrative that they have about themselves is fabricated. It has an agenda behind it. The person in China, he's not really, what is he reading in his history books? Oh, the history of China. Says who? Well, he's a PhD. He wrote it. He's studied it all of his life. How could you not believe him? That's exactly the reason why I don't believe him. So the point is just saying, so why should I? So all these other ideas and opinions and histories that people think they have is all social constructs by historians that have political and social agendas. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, we could look up to it and be like, hey, man, it's just like, why does society pick and choose certain black leaders? Like, why, like, we gotta say, why is Malcolm X so famous? Why is Martin Luther King so famous? We didn't make them famous. They made them famous. Hey, sorry about that. You there?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Anyways, so these are just the things that I'm working through. Any thoughts? I think you would have a lot to say about this.
Well, I guess I have. I guess it would be a question. Would this train of thought? What would be the like? What would be the outcome? Or the like? Let's say on this journey through this line of thinking and through these observations, like who would it be for? I guess that's like, what would be the end goal? Like, whose perception, or whose, like, what would be the reasoning behind this particular, I want to call it like a study, being in sociology, and we always have case studies. And so this would be like a study, even that crosses many lines. We're dealing with psychology, we're dealing with a lot, when what you're talking about. And so, like, who would this study be for? I guess that because that kind of frames everything in the right perspective for me.
Okay, so I don't know about the word study the way I understand, like definition wise. I think we probably if but I will say what I hear you asking me is, say a person accepted this line of thought, what would be the outcome, right? And I would say that when we start to connect to these different energies that the different nations represent, and those different energies that the different nations represent, and how those energies are within me, then I could go to even a deeper level within myself and seeing that the different aspects of my genetics that are a combination of all these different experiences and genetic lines and people and histories, is that at the root of me is that I am an expression of God's light. Ultimately, that's what I am. I am a spherot. I am an expression of God's light in the same way that the tree is an expression of God's light, right? And it's something that you say, well, everyone knows that, right? But do we? Do we define ourselves as an expression of God's light? And not just me, every single human being that exists on this planet Earth, right? And that's the true identity of mankind, is that we're all expressions of the Sphirot. And all of us represent something of this heavenly body that we refer to as the Shekinah, right? And so that aspect of ourselves is we're directly connected, or an expression of that heavenly body, if that makes sense. This
Yeah.
is according to the words of Rav Ashlag. Go ahead.
Well, I get, well, no, what I meant by the question, I guess I could have framed it a little bit differently. Okay, so like in any project, there's like whenever we're dealing with people groups or peoples, there's a control group, right? And so you have this control group, and you're getting information, you're gathering information and data to come to a conclusion about that, either that group, or you're trying to relay a message to that group. Um, and so what I guess my question is who, in whose benefit is the study? Like you're gonna have those that's doing the study. You're gonna have those that are doing the collecting the data, kind of watching the control group. And so it would be like, would this particular mindset be to enhance the experience of the African American, or is it to analyze the African American from the standpoint of gaining a different perception or perspective of the African American?
I would say that the world can decolonize themselves from these ideas that takes us away from the godliness of who we are as humans, by seeing the African American inquiry and the African American decolonizing itself. Because see, the beauty of our situation is that the national idea has never embraced us, right? It's never said that, you guys are American and this. In fact, it always reminds us that we weren't. So when we talk about this idea of decolonizing oneself, we don't have the same national identity. We don't have the same relationship with the nation state. We don't have the same relationship with culture, right? We developed our own culture that organically, and it's still manifesting our culture every day, right? So it's really about the idea of what a new human being can be like, right? A new human being that does not perceive itself as from a frame standpoint of from nationalism or from race or from economics or any of these other social constructs, but rather could see themselves from a frame from the standpoint of a combination of powers that stem from different nations that have intermixed over the centuries to put them as an individual in a particular position to bring a particular uniqueness to the world. And underneath even that expression of the uniqueness is the understanding of the fact that all human beings are expressing of different spherot, of different lights. And so those different lights that we are expressing in the world is the purpose of why we were created. Right? Was exactly, for that for that idea, right? And so that is saying that, like, pushing a new human design where the human being can relate to itself beyond narrative, beyond, conception of other, of conception of superiority, without conception of, all these different, mechanisms that if we had to write it down on a paper would be the things that we define ourselves by. Right, we're all expressions of the Ein Sof, the endless world. We are the lights that the Ein Sof wanted to reveal in this reality, right? Along with we're the highest lights, but all of creation are just these lights. So re-seeing ourselves in that way what could allow us to create in new ways. We talk about innovations, right? We talk about products, services, right? In an age where labor does not exist, now we're talking about connecting on a higher vibration, right? And creating industry. Now we're talking about education that is connected to a higher vibration, right? Because of the demand of industry, right? We're talking about healthcare at a higher vibration, right? Because the basic facilitating of basic healthcare is done by robots that are more proficient than human beings. So now we could evolve to a higher level of human expression, right? And so that's where we're trying to get to as a collective human society. We're saying on the micro of that, you have this dynamic of these people called the African Americans, who came into North America through indentured servitude, and because of the social constructs and the social laws of that society, live relatively independent of the mainstream society. However, because of this ambiguity and expansion of America, they intermix with many other groups that were already there, like the Spanish, like the American Indians, and obviously the white slave owners, right? And then you go even further back, these people are Africans and they have the power to call of Africa. And like we said, many of these people are descendants of the Israelites, right? And so this idea, even from that some of these people are even connected to the base of Migdash, right? And to Mount Sinai. So you have all these different strengths and powers from all these different nations inside of this collective group of people in North America under this unique social conditions. And what I'm saying out of that is a mechanism of decolonization. Because as we decolonize ourselves, it's easier for the Europeans to say, hey, even the narrative about Europe, it's not real. It doesn't benefit me, right? It may benefit some white people. It doesn't benefit me. Me thinking that I'm superior to other people may benefit some of those people, but it doesn't benefit me. Same thing in the Middle East. Same thing in Asia, right?
Well,
same thing in Americas. Go ahead.
okay. Well, I guess I see where you're going with that, but I do have some concerns about because with the amongst African Americans. Okay, so imagine and believe me, amongst African Americans, you're gonna have just a whole lot of different um, nationalities. You're gonna have that because of slavery. But prior to that, but when we see what is happening though within the African American community, you do see African Americans, whether they say that they are Hebrew Israelites, most African Americans are identifying, I believe, spiritually and from even a physical standpoint, from ancient cultures. Like I don't see many African Americans saying, hey, unless they have it in their family, saying, hey, I'm Polish, or I'm I'm Ugandan. Most of them will say, hey, I'm Kemetic, I'm from Kemet, I'm a Moor, from the so it's they're attaching themselves to ancient peoples. And there's a verse that I'm concerned about. I've always been concerned about it. And it's in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 13 and 14. It says, and it shall be as the chase roll, and as a sheep that no man taketh up, they shall every man turn to his own people, and flee every one into his own land. And I know it in Hebrew it reads a little bit differently, but the idea is that in the days of Mashiach, men are going to return to their nationality. And to say that, if we say, well, okay, African Americans, it's like this new idea or new people that's not really connected to anything. That's not connected to a land, a people that's on the earth today. Is almost, now we could, if we take that, we could look at that from the standpoint of saying, well, African Americans would be considered the Levitical order of the world, because they're not attached to a land. They're only attached to God. That's their only heritage, and that's fine, but it still doesn't negate the fact that when we say, for this new dynamic, we it's kind of like we like there was a bomb that was thrown, the explosion went off, and you got children with hands blown off and knees, and then we say, oh, these are new people. This is a new type of human being, and that's not true. And so from that dynamic, that's why I was asking, like, who would this particular type of train of thought, who would it? And I'm gonna tell you something. Most African Americans believe that they're the children of God. I can tell you that now. Now, from that understanding, that is one of the motivators that has allowed African Americans to look at their oppressors and be merciful and say, we forgive you. This is what allowed African Americans to allow enemies to come into their churches, have Bible studies, and kill everybody in the Bible study. It's because we see ourselves as children of God. Now, which child of God we are, that I think that's what strikes a nerve in the world today. I think that's what strikes a nerve in the world today. And so it's
Yeah, but
I
let me ask
see
you.
it.
Go
Go ahead, I'm listening.
No, I want to ask you. So when we talk about, like, I mean, the people that we're talking about, the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, in 2025, their genetic makeup is completely different than it was when they first came into America. 500 years before that, right?
Well, let me ask you this here. Whose genetic makeup is exactly the same as it was in antiquity? No one.
Mhm.
That's not. It's no one. So the idea is even though it can be portrayed, that's also a projection, and that's also really a lie. It's a lie, because there was a whole lot of mixing and mingling going on in Europe. There was a whole lot of mixing and mingling going on in Africa, South Africa. There are slaves all over the world. So if to say genetically, if we're going to use genetics, then everybody's in that same boat. But this is the difference, though. There's one aspect of it from saying that we are genetically corrupted or polluted willfully or forcibly. And a lot of times, for a lot of the nations in the world, they mix and mingle among willfully. Now, I can't say now. 2025, we seeing that with a lot of African Americans, but there was a time frame that we was, that it was forced upon us, and so the idea is that when I really don't like to go to genetics because that's really not a good marker because the whole world has been conquered. The whole world has been diluted and polluted. If we're gonna there's no real Aryan pure blood in this earth today.
Yeah, and I'm saying on that point, I'm saying that um yeah, I'm saying on that point, they're saying that so the people who came through this transatlantic slave trade, as you're saying, that came to North America, did the natural evolutionary thing, which other people have also done, around the world when they've migrated in migration and mixing that type of thing. So we agree on that. The point that I'm emphasizing by the African American position, which is different than anyone else in the world, is the isolation and the subjugation of this group of people within that intermixing, right? And that intermixing within this subjugation and not necessarily having a identity of like these people were not like when people integrated and mixed in Britain, they were British. You know what I'm saying? And so they assumed the dynamic of being British and Britain and these types of things. But however, it's like they may have came from a different part of the world, as where the African American has never had that ability to identify itself as where it was. It was considered to be black. It was considered to be Negro. It was considered to be product, right? So that aspect of it makes it unique in terms of that intermixing, which is normal in the world, but it makes it unique as it relates to this particular set of people. And I'm saying, and because of that unique experience, culture and ideas have transmitted out of that have encapsulated the world from a very small minority of people, but with this different culture that the world has not necessarily seen before.
Well, let me ask you this here. So, do you believe that most of the blacks or the Negroes, because that's the Negroes that got on those that got on those ships, any of them that got on those ships, when they got on the ship, do you believe that they had an awareness of their culture, awareness of from wherever they were from,
Yeah, of
awareness of
course.
their culture? Of course. Okay, so that means that there was an intentional, and I got some great books about this if you ever, but there was an intentional effort to get a people to lose and to destroy their culture, to destroy their identity, to destroy their family relationships, ties, heritage, and so forth. Now, this is what's interesting. I believe, and I've done some extensive research on that system itself. That system itself was designed with the intention to do that. So that means that we can go into scripture and we can go into Tanakh, and now we can see, well, did Hashem see this? Did he?
Yeah,
Is this
yeah,
something? Yeah,
yeah,
he saw it. He
yeah,
saw it.
yeah.
So
That's that,
so
and that. Yeah, go ahead.
okay,
Yeah.
so when he saw it, he saw that, and one of the things that's very interesting and powerful is that when he saw it for his children. And so with that dynamic, with that dynamic, to take the approach of like this universal concept that really leans towards Catholicism. That's what Catholicism is. It's a universal, and it really is a Christian doctrine. So to take that like that, instead of looking at it from the aspect of saying, hey, you know what? Listen, a group of children got stolen. Okay, now not all of them, were of this royal seed over here. Now some was of a royal seed of Kemet, some was of a royal seed of of Canaan or whoever, a Moabite, whoever. But in that bunch, there are children of Israel there. Okay, and so now, how do we identify them? Well, we can. How can we do that? It's mixing and mingling. How can we identify it? But this is how. This is what the Torah tells us: is that when they take to mind the blessings and the curses, and they repent and they turn back, nobody that's not of God, that's not of the house of Israel, is going to be turning back. And so I think it's a powerful thing for us to examine this phenomenon, this miracle that we're seeing, that God has the ability to be a respecter of principles and practice. Because when we see that, we should look at that control group and first look at all the dynamics and say, wow, man, do you really believe? Now think about it like this here. There are Black Orthodox Jews that I've actually heard say that they get oppressed for two reasons instead of one. And that means that they're getting oppressed because they Black, and they get oppressed because they're Jews. So now they're Black Jews. But the ideology is that who would want that if it's not in you? It's so I think that just looking at that whole dynamic and understanding that, you know what, we cannot couple Hebrew Israelites in with the whole crowd. Now I know Hebrew Israelites, for the Hebrew Israelite, some of the doctrines, some of the practices that have been there is to proselytize as many as possible, and you start gaining gaining all of this, try to get as many as possible. But that, I don't agree with that. Doing that, I believe that we should emerge out of a people, and that we're emerging based upon our practice and our love for Hashem. You see, so that I think that's how I kind of view it.
Yeah, and like I said, like I understand, how, that aspect of, I don't know how we would call it, like African American conscious community. I guess maybe that's the way to say it, and the different perspectives that come along with that, right? And I get that, but I'm saying, like, I'm more so like, I mean, me personally, I see a lot of that as speculative, right? Like for a person to say, like, hey, I come from Kemet, I mean, that's like thousands of years ago, you know what I'm saying? So it's just saying, and I get it, you know what I mean? And I get the connection, but I'm just saying, just on like a practical level, the Africans that came over here intermixed with the Europeans, intermixed with the Spanish people, intermixed with American Indians, right? And were indentured, as you said. So all the culture and things that existed in Africa was systematically removed, right? By God's will, right? And so God's will removed all this, from his people. It removed history, removed culture, that, and then they intermixing with different groups and different dynamics and exposed to all these other different components, right? And and so and so from that from that place, that's who I am, right? That's I'm just saying myself. That's who I am. I'm a mixture of these things. Like American Indian is a big part of my physical and genetic identity. Along with African American, along with the Europeans that it's the reason why I have hair all over my body. And I don't know too many Africans that, according to the Torah, all of these nations have specific gifts and powers, right? All these different nations have specific things that that they that they have the ability to give off, right, to the world, right? And they have given up and they've done great things. And so my argument is saying, why not? Why do I live in a society that doesn't allow me to explore that component? Why do I live in a society that wants to pretend that I'm only one aspect of existence, right? We very well know how integrated we are as people in North America with all these other different society and genetic lines, right? And so from that perspective, is like this whole concept of Black, or even the idea of just saying like, okay, yeah, you have Israelite component, but it's not like what the Hispanic people we mix with, they're Israelites too, the American Indian Israelites too, the white plantation master, he's an Israelite. I mean, it's like the point is just saying, I mean, yes, but there's a lot of people that have Israelite DNA, a lot of those Hispanic people, right, who are Catholics, right? They also are of many of them were expelled by Queen Isabella, and they became these other religions, as a means of survival, right? So you have people all throughout the Middle East. People are Muslim today. People in Pakistan and all these different, the Afghanistan, all these places, like these people, like they're also descendants of Israel, right? And as we know, people in India, all types of things. So there's people who are descendants of India. I mean, descendants of Israel all the world. However, the way that God made it is that those people are also very much intermixed with those societies and cultures, right? The difference between the African, the Israelites who came through the transatlantic slave trade, because we can't say all the Black people were, but there were some, and a good percentage that were, right? Enough that it should be in history books. It should be a part of learned curriculum, right? So that aspect exists, but but the difference between me, who say my ancestors come from like Igbo or some other tribe west of Africa, and they practice Israelite traditions, and they migrated throughout Africa over the millennium. The point is just saying that by them, the difference between those and the people who are in Persia, who are also Israelites, right? Or the difference between people in Iraq that were Israelites, that those people who are in those environments were also subjugated, but they didn't intermix because they had Jewish law. As were the people who were descendants of the Israelites that came to the transatlantic slave trade, there was no Jewish law. And they were also subjugated, but they intermixed. And so because there was no, Israelite culture and these different types of things, then you have a dynamic where these people just evolved and blend into whatever the culture was, Christianity or whatever. But the point is just saying that the intermixing is a little bit different if you want to just go on the perspective of Israelite. If you just want to go on the perspective of Israelites and just say, okay, I want to focus on the aspect of Israelites, the African Americans, or the people who were in the transatlantic slave trades were descendants of Israelites, those people specifically, right? Those people came to North America, right? Those people, as you said, were systematically removed from all cultural identity, practices, everything, right? Then they were put into a blender of slavery, right? And so this blender of slavery was also another form of psychological, physical oppression. And out of that, identity of spirituality and these things emerged, which was Christianity. So from that basis, and that went on, for hundreds of years, right? And so now we're here today, and we went through a series of progressional processes, and then I look at those people today, not my own opinion, not Black folklore thought, but just the practical reality. We are a mixture of American Indians white slave masters, Africans, and Spanish people who lived in the land. And in 2025, the vast majority of the people who descend from transatlantic slave trade have those influences within them. And so my point is just saying, like, I look at that as like that is something to reflect upon, because from that perspective, then I could see maybe a bigger concept of why these people had this experience, why they went through this, why this had to happen in this way. Because through this oppressive reality that they went through, now as we evolve into a new era, right? A new era of thought, inspired by technology, right? And the unity of human beings around the world through technology, that we can start imagining new societies, new perspectives. But one of the things that's stopping us and holding us back is things like culture, is things that the narratives that, the narrative creators of different parts of the world, different societies created for the masses. Those narratives work well from that component of the societies that were built prior, but those narratives are not going to create the sensitivity and the empathy and the connectivity that we need as human beings to spur forward in an era of robot technology, where robots don't have the ability for empathy. Robots don't have the ability for sensitivities. Robots don't have the, so God is pushing us in this direction. And when I see my history, right, as African American, I look at that design of these people in front. I'm like, wow, like what a great cast of lack of better terms, characters, right, in the movie of life, to spur this kind of like era of decolonizing oneself, right? Because the decolonizing of myself is not to have superiority, but rather to have equality. So that culture of me decolonizing is also for you to decolonize, right? And then what do we decolonize to? Human being kite, right? That I am a human being. I am a person that, you know, is connected to the broader human being, consciousness, that exists. So, that's how I see it. Now, within that, if a person says that, it doesn't remove practices of the Torah, it doesn't marginalize it. It just shows that I don't have that. If a person wants to connect to God in this way as a human being, this is the technology that was given to Adam, right? The Jewish people were the first community to receive this knowledge as a collective by witnessing God on Mount Sinai. But the reality is that from the times of Adam all the way to Noah, from Noah all the way to Abraham, there were wise men throughout those ages that understood exactly the same things we did, and even to some generations, even at a higher level, much higher level, right? And so now, we see the Torah as a technology for the soul, right? It's not a thing of just a people and this is the things we do and you do these things. No, the people who have the souls that need to connect to God in a pure way, this is the Torah's design. Those souls were stood on Mount Sinai. Some of those souls refer to themselves as Jews right now. Some of them don't. But nevertheless, the soul's desire, right? The soul's desire to connect to God in that way is what Israel is, right? Which is that framework of Israel, is the souls with the supernatural desire to cling to the Creator, to want to bring God's truth. And they were willing to leave their families behind to stand on Mount Sinai. So that's that perspective. So any reflections on those points? Did I answer anything?
Yeah, and I sent you a message. Just take a look at that. So if I cut out,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think I think that this is a very it's a good way to it's a good study, but I I guess I'm more focused on the aspect of helping to build the institutions to help and to assist Jews that want to keep the statutes commandments of the Most High, and so it's like, those communities that do exist, joining in with them, helping them to understand, you know, the Torah, understand this is how we should, bringing more unification. And so I guess I think that a lot of people have spent a lot of time going into like genetics, going into the history, going into a lot of these different areas, and quite frankly, the communities stay in the same place. They kind of stay in the same like I remember these particular conversations almost 15, almost 20 years ago. And as far as the progression, as far as the communities, there are some communities, there are some communities that have grown, but there's still not a whole lot of unification, especially here in the South. You see a lot more of it in the North, but not so much here in the South. And so I believe that helping to develop and saying, you know what, hey, let's put everybody aside for a minute and let's just focus in on the house, and let's get the house together
So
and just
so I just
yeah,
I apologize. I just want to jump on that point. So yeah. So I think that's I agree with you 100%. But this is the thing. So I agree with you 100%. A guy, right? Let's use this analogy, right? Guy, guy, guy wants the girl, right? Guy wants to talk to the girl, right? He wants the girl. She's a pretty girl. All the guys want this girl. She's a pretty girl, whatever, right? And so he sees that every single guy is going and talking to it, right? And they're kind of like saying similar things, and some of them got her attention a little bit, this, blah, blah, blah. So he wants to take a different approach because he wants to create a sense of uniqueness there, right? And so when we talk about the Torah world, right, which, this is my life, right, is that the perspective that I'm talking about is a perspective that could allow two Jews to walk in a synagogue together, right, in the morning for Shachrit, and wrap their tefillin and not think one bit about any type of cultural or ethnic difference between them. And they could see each other as two expressions of God's light, and the minyan of 10 men being a mechanism of 10 lights coming together to manifest this consciousness. So what I'm saying is how we get to that place. This is the frame of thinking that we have to get to the place. And we're saying from the African American experience, we can start this discussion, right? But it only could happen if we re-critique this definition, right? And this definition of what a human being is largely designed around this idea of ethnicity, this idea of race, this idea of national identity, right? And national identity is why we're fighting, right? Ethnicity is why we, are racist between each other and prejudice, right? So what we're saying is it's saying that if we can go into a society that transcends those definitions, that transcends that narrative, right? What does that look like? And if we were to do that, what type of tools will we need? And I said the African American experience, because they're not African American anymore, right? They're a combination of a collective different set of cultures in the United States,